It's 11 at night, the kids are finally asleep. Mark's 54, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, and for the first time in years, he's actually looking. $284,000. That's the number on the screen. He stares at it for a second, then types the question into Google that half of Australia over 50 has typed at some point. How much do I need to retire in Australia? First result, $630,000. He shuts the laptop, doesn't say anything, just sits there in the quiet, running the maths in his head, and none of it adds up the way he wants it to. If that's ever been you, staring at a number that feels like it's laughing at you, stick around because that 630,000 figure is doing something almost nobody clocks. It's not wrong. It's just not built for the life most Australians are actually going to live. And by the end of this, you're going to know exactly where you stand, not against some headline, but against your own life. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about that $630,000 figure. It's not a minimum. It's not even average. It's the number for one very specific lifestyle. Private health cover, a newer car, overseas trips every couple of years, dinners out whenever you feel like it. That's a genuinely good retirement. It's also not the only one that exists. There's a second tier most people have never heard mentioned, and it's dramatically cheaper. Somewhere around $110,000 for a single person who owns their home outright. That's not scraping by. That's groceries, bills, health cover, the odd weekend away, a car that runs. The gap between those two numbers isn't really about how much money you've saved. It's about which version of retirement you're actually picturing when you panic. So before we go further, stop picturing the 630. We'll come back to it. Picture your actual week instead, because that's the number we're building toward, not the headline. Now here's the part that changes the entire equation, and almost nobody explains it properly. Once you turn 60 and you start drawing money out of your super, that money is yours. All of it. Not after tax. Not minus whatever the ATO wants this year. Completely tax-free, dollar for dollar, straight into your account. Sit with that for a second. Because most people never do the comparison properly. If you're on a $70,000 salary right now, you're not taking home $70,000. Tax, Medicare levy, all of it gets carved off before it ever reaches you. You might genuinely be living on $55,000 or so after the government's had its cut. But a retiree pulling $55,000 a year out of super at 65, that's the whole $55,000. Nothing missing. This is why every "you need $1 million" headline feels so brutal and is also slightly dishonest. It's comparing a pre-tax salary number to a post-tax retirement need, and those two things were never the same animal. Your retirement income doesn't need to match your old salary. It needs to match what you actually used to take home, and that's a noticeably smaller mountain to climb. Let's make this real instead of theoretical, because the average Australian doesn't exist. You exist at your age with your balance. So let's run 3 different people through the same math. First, someone in their mid-30s. Balance is probably modest right now, maybe in the tens of thousands. And that's completely normal at this stage. What actually matters for this person isn't the current number at all. It's time. Employers are now required to put in 12% of your wage every pay cycle, whether you think about it or not. Left alone for another 30 years, even an average balance today compounds into something that barely resembles where it started. This person's biggest risk isn't a bad year in the market, it's doing nothing extra. And assuming the 12% alone gets them all the way there. Sometimes it does. Often it needs a nudge. Second, someone in their early 50s. This is Mark's bracket, and it's the most anxious one, because retirement's gone from theoretical to visible on the horizon. But there's less runway left to fix a shortfall with time alone. This is the stage where their actual math starts mattering more than the vibe. A realistic target, a genuine look at what's already there, and critically, a decision about whether extra contributions now are worth more than a holiday later. They usually are. Third, someone in their early 60s, closing in on the finish line. At this age, the typical Australian holds somewhere in the low to mid 200,000s in super, and typically less for women, largely a legacy of years spent out of the workforce raising kids, which is its own conversation for another day, sitting well under the 630 headline. And yet plenty of these people retire completely fine, because super was never supposed to carry the whole weight by itself. Which brings us to the part of the puzzle almost nobody factors in when they're panicking at midnight over a super balance, the age pension. If you own your home outright, you can hold up to roughly $333,000 in other assets and still receive the full pension. Not a reduced one, the full rate, and it doesn't fully disappear until your assets climb well past $700,000. For a lot of Australians, especially homeowners, the pension isn't a backup plan. It's a permanent, quiet co-pilot sitting underneath the super the entire way through retirement, which is exactly why owning your home changes the whole equation more than almost any other single factor. A homeowner needing a modest lifestyle might need somewhere around $110,000 in super. A renter chasing that same modest lifestyle needs closer to $340,000 because the pension math simply doesn't stretch the same way when housing costs never stop. That's not a small gap. That's nearly $250,000 of difference, created entirely by one line item. Whether you're still paying rent at 70, if you're renting right now and under 50, that's the single most important sentence in this video. Getting into a paid-off home by retirement isn't just lifestyle preference. It's arguably worth more to your future than any contribution strategy we could talk about. Here's a gap almost nobody plans for, and it catches people off guard nearly every time. You can generally get into your super from age 60 once you've stopped working, but the age pension doesn't start until 67. That's 7 years, sometimes longer if you retire early, where your super has to carry you entirely on its own with no pension underneath it yet. Most people picture retirement as one long, flat stretch. It's not. There's an early phase where you're funding yourself completely solo, and only later does the pension quietly step in and take some of the weight off. If you're planning to retire at 60 or even earlier, this is the stretch that needs its own separate number. Not just will I be okay eventually, but can I actually get through these 7 years first? And here's the one that nobody wants to hear, because it runs against everything we're taught about saving. The biggest mistake in Australian retirement planning usually isn't running out of money. It's the opposite. It's spending decades building a buffer so large out of fear that the healthiest and most physically capable years of retirement, the ones where you can still travel properly, still get on a plane, still walk a full day without paying for it the next morning, get spent worrying instead of living. Then the money finally gets safe enough to spend somewhere in the 70s, right as the body starts negotiating terms. Retiring on a slightly smaller number at 60 and actually living those years tends to beat retiring on a bigger number at 70 and running out of the energy to use it. That's not financial advice to spend recklessly. It's a nudge to actually build a real number instead of an infinite one. So fear stops being the thing setting your retirement date. Quick, important note before we land this. Retirement isn't about parking your balance and living off the interest forever. For almost everyone, that only works with a very large amount saved up. Most people are actually drawing the balance down over time, and that's fine. That's what it's there for. The danger is a bad market hitting. Right as you start withdrawing, pulling money out of a balance that's also falling drains it faster than either problem alone would. It's why a lot of retirees keep a cash buffer sitting aside. So a rough 18 months in the market doesn't force them to sell at the worst possible moment. Back to Mark at his kitchen table, laptop shut, staring at $284,000. Here's what that number actually means once you strip the panic out of it. He owns his home. He's got another 11 years of 12% contribution still landing before he even thinks about stopping. He's not chasing $630,000 in isolation. He's chasing a modest, comfortable life that gets topped up by a pension he's never once accounted for, funded by a super that arrives completely tax-free the moment he can touch it. His number was never $630,000. It was never anyone else's number. It was his own weekly life, priced honestly for the first time. That's the actual question underneath all of this. Not how much do I need to retire, as if there's one universal answer sitting in a Google search. It's what does the life I actually want cost? Once housing, the pension, and tax-free super are all properly accounted for. Answer that honestly just once, and the number stops being terrifying. It just becomes a plan. If this helped you actually see your own number instead of someone else's headline, hit like. It's the only reason this reaches the next person lying awake over their super balance. Subscribe if you want the next one landing in your feed, and go check your own balance tonight. Properly, not the panicked scroll, the real one. See you in the next one.